Every morning, you walk your child to the gates and call it school. One word. It feels simple. But in law, that word covers a dozen very different things. And the differences aren't trivia. They decide who is responsible when something goes wrong. A community school and an academy on the same street are funded differently, governed differently, and answer to different people. And there's a precise legal line that decides when a setting is a real, registered school. And when running, it is a crime. Before this channel goes anywhere else, we need the map. Today, what the law actually means by school. No jargon, just the rules and where they bite. Start with the bare definition. In law, a school is an educational institution that sits outside the further education and higher education sectors and exists to provide primary education, secondary education, or both. That's it. If it's for younger children up to around 16 and it isn't a college or a university, the law treats it as a school. That definition is deliberately broad. Statutory guidance uses school as an umbrella over all of them. Maintained schools, academies and free schools, alternative provision academies, pupil referral units, and maintained nursery schools. So hold on to this. School is a category, not a single thing. The rest of this episode is what's filed inside it. Now, the part most parents are never told. The law sets an exact threshold for when a setting becomes an independent school, and that word matters because crossing the line triggers a legal duty to register. A setting is an independent school if it provides full-time education for 5 or more pupils of compulsory school age, or at least one child of that age who is looked after by a local authority, or at least one child of that age who has a statement of special educational needs or an education, health and care plan. Just one of those is enough. And look who's named there. Looked after children, and children with an EHCP plan, some of the most vulnerable children in the country. The law singles them out so that even a tiny setting, taking a single one, counts as a school. Cross that threshold, and the setting must register with the Department for Education. Running an independent school that isn't registered is a criminal offence. We'll come back to that. So if anyone tells a parent, we're not really a school, so those rules don't apply, that threshold is how you check. So who do all these rules apply to? Children of compulsory school age. A child reaches that age on the next prescribed day after their 5th birthday. And the prescribed days are the 31st of December, the 31st of March, and the 31st of August. They stop being of compulsory school age on the last Friday in June of the school year in which they turn 16. So it isn't loosely 5 to 16, it's pinned to those specific dates. That's the window when the legal duties bite hardest. Here's the part that genuinely surprises people. The legal duty to educate your child doesn't sit on the school. It doesn't sit on the council. It sits on you. Under Section 7 of the Education Act 1996, it is the absolute responsibility of every parent to make sure their child of compulsory school age receives an efficient, full-time education, one suitable to the child's age, ability and aptitude, and to any special educational needs they have. You can meet that duty 2 ways, by registering your child at a school and making sure they attend, or otherwise, educating them outside the school system, such as elective home education, as long as it stays suitable and full-time. Here's the narrator's read. Flagged as my framing, not statute, the burden is on the parent, not the state. Hold on to that. It runs underneath almost everything this channel covers. So what happens when that duty looks like it isn't being met? 2 separate routes. First, if a local authority thinks a child isn't getting a suitable education, at school or at home, it serves a written warning notice giving the parent at least 15 days to prove it. If the parent can't, and the authority thinks the child should be in school, it must issue a school attendance order naming a specific school the child has to be registered at. Ignoring that order is a criminal offence, unless the parent can prove the child is suitably educated otherwise, carrying a fine of up to £1,000. Second, if your child is registered at a school, you have a separate duty to make sure they attend regularly. Failing to is an offence under Section 444. The basic version is strict liability, up to £1,000. The aggravated version, where you know your child isn't attending and don't act without reasonable justification, can mean up to £2,500, a community order, or up to 3 months in prison. But, and this matters just as much as the powers, the law writes its own defences in. A child isn't treated as failing to attend if the absence was down to sickness or an unavoidable cause, if the school granted a leave of absence, if it was a day set apart for religious observance by the parent's faith, if the council failed its own home-to-school transport duty, or in defined travelling trade situations. So the enforcement is real, but not unconditional. The same statute that creates the offence lists the exceptions to it. Now the types you'll actually meet. First, maintained schools, what most people mean by state school. They're funded by central government through the local authority, and the law splits them into categories: community and foundation schools, voluntary aided and voluntary controlled schools, which usually have a religious foundation behind them, maintained special schools for pupils with special educational needs, and maintained nursery schools. The category isn't just a label. It decides who employs the staff and who runs admissions, and those differ from one type to the next. Why does that dry detail matter? Because who employs the staff and who runs admissions is really who you complain to. The category quietly decides who's responsible. And we'll pull that apart next episode. Here's the one that catches almost everyone out. Academies and free schools are state-funded and free to attend, but in law they are not maintained schools. They sit outside local authority control, and legally they're classified as independent schools, the same legal family as the private school down the road. The difference is that academies are run by not-for-profit trusts and funded directly by the Department for Education through a binding contract called a funding agreement, which requires them to take pupils mainly from the local area and forbids charging fees. Free schools are simply academies in law. The term just tends to mean a brand new one, rather than a converted one. And because they're legally independent, they don't have to follow the national curriculum. So, state school and legally an independent school can both be true of the same building. That's not a loophole, it's the design. Private, fee-paying, independent schools sit in that same legal category. They don't have to teach the national curriculum, but to operate at all, they must register with the Department for Education and then comply at all times with the independent school standards. There are 8 areas in all, covering the quality of education, spiritual, moral, social and cultural development, including actively promoting fundamental British values, welfare, health and safety, including safeguarding, the vetting of staff and proprietors, safe premises, information for parents, complaints, and leadership. But be honest about what that is. A set of minimum standards a school must meet, not a guarantee the school is good. If a school fails them, the DfE can demand an action plan, bar it from taking new pupils, force part of it to close, or strike it off the register entirely. And the setting that skips all of this? Running an independent school that isn't registered is a criminal offence, because it means children taught with no external check on safeguarding, safety, or educational quality at all. Ofsted runs a dedicated unregistered schools team. Where they have reasonable cause to believe an illegal school is operating, inspectors can enter premises without notice, use body-worn cameras and copy documents. Settings that keep operating can be prosecuted, though the Secretary of State's consent is legally required first, and a person found guilty can face a fine and imprisonment. So a setting that crosses the threshold but never registers isn't a school the law recognises, it's an offence. 2 more you may meet, both still under that umbrella word, school. Alternative provision and pupil referral units for children who can't attend a mainstream school through illness, exclusion, or other reasons, and non-maintained special schools run by charities or trusts approved by the Secretary of State, often for children with complex EHC plans. Different routes in, same question underneath. So, a school is a broad legal category, not one thing. The duty to educate your child sits on you, the parent, and whether a setting is maintained, an academy, private or illegal isn't a label for the brochure. It decides who's legally responsible and who isn't. That's the thread this whole channel pulls on. When something goes wrong, who is actually on the hook? Next time, we take 2 of those labels, a maintained school and an academy, side by side on the same street, and show how that one word changes who you turn to when the school stops listening. If this made the system a little clearer, subscribe, because the people who built it this confusing are counting on you not understanding it. This isn't legal advice, it's the map. See you next week.